Hey, everybody. Good morning. Roman Polner here, coming to you live from Pillar 6 College Planning. Today is our Financial Aid Wednesday, and we're going to be talking about the most common FAFSA mistakes that I see families make year after year that you'll want to avoid. So I'm going to talk about them. There are 5 most common FAFSA mistakes that are costing people lots of money. We're going to talk about them and how to avoid them. But first, state the obvious, I'm in the car again, and so I'm sorry about that. I couldn't take this from home, but I've got a bad back, and it's been acting up lately, so I had to go to the doctor, and today at 10:40 was my appointment time. And since I promised to do this live every Wednesday at 10 o'clock Pacific Standard, I decided it's better to do it from the car than not do it at all. So I'm taking you along for the ride. Well, I'm parked, but thanks for being here with me. So let's shift gears. Let's talk about the most common FAFSA mistakes. And the reason you want to avoid them is because the FAFSA is your key to financial aid. It's key to money that you can use to pay for college. And unfortunately, because our financial aid system is a bit complex, and because colleges have just been raising their prices at such a fast rate, that most families don't have enough money set aside in order to pay for college comfortably, and they don't have enough money out of their income to pay for college. So they turn to the financial aid system, but unfortunately, because of these complexities, they're inevitably going to make some of the most common mistakes that end up costing them money, because every single mistake that you make on the FAFSA means less money from the financial aid system to help you pay for college. We're going to talk about that. We're going to solve it. And by the way, for those of you watching live, if you've got any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I want this to be as interactive and as helpful for everybody as possible. So one of the benefits of joining us live is that you can actually ask the questions, or if I'm saying something that doesn't make sense, or if I miss something, ask me. I'll go back and I'll answer it. And if you're watching the replay, you got questions, put them in the comments. Myself or a member of my team is going to go back. We'll monitor this post, and then we'll get back to you. So let's talk about this. The 5 stages that I see families go through all the time when it comes to filling out the FAFSA are these. There's excitement initially because they're coming to the FAFSA looking for money. They quickly realize it's not as easy as they had hoped or thought it might be, so they start to get a little bit nervous, and then they start to sweat quite a bit because they realize it's quite an undertaking and they're woefully underprepared. And that's when they start getting frustrated because it's not as easy as they had thought, and it's going to take a lot longer for most families to do than they initially planned for. And then the final stage is this, like, oh, damn it, why aren't we getting the money? Because that usually happens when their kids get into school. They get their acceptance letter, followed by the financial aid award letter that doesn't have enough money. And so parents are being presented with a big bill. Their back is up against the wall because there's no more time left to get money, and they get really frustrated. And that's the frustration that we aim to solve and get rid of entirely with these Wednesday financial aid lives. So here's our highly coveted less boo, more yay financial aid formula to getting you more money, is to avoid these 5 most common mistakes that I see families make on the FAFSA. So I'm going to talk about I'm going to list each one of them out, and then I'll go back and talk about how to fix it and how to avoid making it. So the first biggest mistake I see families make is they're just not prepared. The second is that they over-report the amount of money that they actually have, or I should say, the amount of money that the FAFSA wants you to report, and as a result, they end up getting less financial aid. The third biggest mistake I see families make is around bad timing. See, FAFSA is very time sensitive, but the government doesn't prompt you, doesn't tell you when those forms are due back in order to get the most amount of financial aid. And as a result, If you're busy, or if you're just a human being and naturally procrastinate, well, guess what? You're going to wait until usually the deadline to complete the FAFSA. And unfortunately, by then, there's just not enough money left in the system to get to pay for college. And instead, the only things government gives you are loans. And we don't want those. The fourth mistake I see families make is they don't verify. They don't double check that things were processed correctly. Because look, there's no system that is absolutely perfect, and there are flaws. So if you don't verify, you won't know until it's too late. The fifth is not adding color. Now, I don't mean like literally coloring in your FAFSA with crayons. That's not what we're talking about, obviously. But you got to add more detail, because even though the FAFSA is like something like 100 pages long, or 100 questions long, excuse me, it's not 100 pages, but it's an intuitive format. So depending on your answers, more questions might pop up. So at most, it'd be about 100 questions. But it still doesn't capture all the detail about every family's financial situation and unique circumstances. So you got to add that level of detail. All right. So those are the 5 biggest mistakes I see families make that end up costing them money in lost financial aid. So let's now talk about them one by one. The first thing I recommend you all do is be prepared to fill out the FAFSA. You want to come from a place of strength. All right. So, hey, by the way, I want to acknowledge these really cool graphics, right? I'm just joking. This is as simple as it gets, but I want to drive the point home. Come from a place of strength and you'll always do better, meaning you'll find more money. You'll make college more affordable, and hopefully you'll be able to avoid debt, which is unfortunately plaguing young people these days, because colleges are so expensive and financial aid is not easy to get. So what does that mean to be prepared? Well, there's really 2 sides of this. The first side is kind of the soft tissue stuff, as I call it. It's not financial. So the FAFSA, right, generally requires that you as a parent put in your financial information, and then your student puts in some of their personal information, like their name, their date of birth, their social, the list of colleges that they're applying to. And then the government asks you to do the same, like your name, your social, etc., your address. And because most people are so busy, right, just in life in general, but especially at this time when your kids are applying to college, which is in your kid's senior year of high school, there's just so much going on that you naturally delay doing things that aren't urgent, right? So most people are constantly fighting this fight against time and against deadlines. And unless the FAFSA is due tomorrow, most parents will say, I'll get to it tomorrow. And here's the problem. As soon as they log into the FAFSA, usually close to the deadline, questions begin to arise, like, do I and my student log in together? Do we need different logins? Who fills out the FAFSA first? Is it me as the parent, or does the student start first? So they start Googling, right? Or they start calling their friends, or they start looking for a financial aid counselor. Well, guess what? There are a lot of these questions. And so every time you delay filling out the FAFSA because you're confronted with an unknown, more time goes by. And like I mentioned in prior videos, there are 18 million people that line up every year starting October 1st to complete the FAFSA. And colleges and the government only have so much money that they can give out. And they start giving out free money first. So if you happen to delay your FAFSA until most of the free money has been given away, it doesn't help you, because the only thing you're going to get are loans. We don't want those. All right. So just learn, what is the FAFSA going to ask you? How do you fill out the FAFSA? Another big question comes up, especially with divorced families, is, well, who fills out the FAFSA, mom or the dad? And then depending on if you're remarried, like, do I have to include my new spouse's information? Or if I'm not remarried, but I'm living with a domestic partner or with another person, like, do their finances have to be disclosed? Well, what if grandparents have money set aside in like a college savings plan? Do they have to put money, or they have to disclose that? Like, all of these questions end up causing people to delay submitting the FAFSA. And delays equal less chances of getting free money. And if you rush through it, right, without doing the research, well, then that's when families make mistakes, and mistakes cost you money. So be prepared. By the way, for those of you watching live, if you wouldn't mind putting FAFSAkit.com into the chat, I would really, really appreciate that, because we have a free ebook that you can download that has all of these 5 mistakes and ways to overcome them. So I talk about how do you actually prepare and when. So if you wouldn't mind, just put in the chat FAFSAkit.com. You can go there. It's absolutely free. Download the ebook. It's really going to help you. And it goes really well with this conversation. All right. The second part of being prepared is the financial stuff. So most parents, again, when it comes to fill out the FAFSA, they scramble. And the FAFSA says, well, report the value of your investments or your savings or the value of college savings accounts and retirement. And unless you know exactly what the FAFSA is asking for, and what it's not asking for, then again, it's easy to make mistakes. So be prepared, take your time, do some research. So if you've got a freshman, sophomore, junior in high school, it's a perfect time to start learning. Now, if you're watching this because you're a parent of a high school senior that just started high school, well, the FAFSA is going to become available October 1st. And well, you want to be ready. So you've got a little bit more than a month. So don't delay. Start learning today. Go to FAFSAkit.com, download the ebook, start learning, or just Google. But there's plenty of information out there. Just be careful about sort of whose advice you follow, because it's not all correct. All right, being prepared. I hope I drove that point home. The second mistake that I see families make is that they over-report the amount of money that they have and the value of the money that they have. Let me explain that. So the FAFSA is designed to collect your financial information and go through a calculation to determine something called your expected family contribution, or your EFC. The EFC is a dollar amount that the government thinks you should be able to pay for college based upon the finances that you're putting on the form. That number is going to be sent to every college that your student applies to and lists on the FAFSA. So then those colleges will know right away exactly how much to expect you to pay out of your pocket. And if the cost of college is higher than that number, then that's how much financial aid that they should technically give you. Unfortunately, again, by not being prepared and by not knowing what they're supposed to report and what they're not supposed to report, most families end up oversharing. They give out more information about their finances to the government than they have to. And the government doesn't know that, right? They just take whatever you give them. And so as a result, most families end up having a higher expected family contribution than they should. So it would stand to reason, if your expected family contribution is higher than it should be, then that's the amount of financial aid that you're effectively losing or disqualifying yourself. So don't do that. Again, go to FAFSAkit.com. I have a list of things that you don't have to report on the FAFSA. And there's hundreds of pages of rules behind the FAFSA. So unless you want to become a master in it, which I welcome you to, we have become masters in it. So I've boiled it all down into just 5 things that you don't have to report on the FAFSA. That's number 1. So go to FAFSAkit.com and see what they are. And then the second thing I want to tell you is you're not supposed to just report the value of the investments or savings that you see on your statement or on your computer screen. You can actually reduce that amount by fees, by taxes, and by expenses that you might incur if you were to convert that account into cash in 30 days. Now, you don't have to actually sell and convert it to cash. It just means that if you did, like, mentally go through the exercise, how much would you have to pay in taxes or fees or expenses? If somebody has a second home, for example, or a rental property, and you're going to sell, you're not going to sell it, right? But if you were to sell it, you'd have capital gains, you'd have other realtor fees, taxes, etc. Discount that value of the home, buy all those expenses, and report the lower value. And by doing that, you're lowering your expected family contribution, and that's a good thing. All right. Third thing, don't be late when submitting the FAFSA. I've said this many times in these Facebook Lives before, but the government technically gives you 19 months to complete the FAFSA, right? It becomes available on October 1st of your kid's senior year of high school. And then it gives you 19 months. Your kid's going to be in college by the time the government technically thinks you should give it back to them. Never, ever, 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 ever wait that long. There's going to be no money for your kids then. Start as early as you can on October 1st or soon thereafter. The reason for that is because financial aid is given out on a first come, first served basis. So by the time your student gets accepted to college, by then you want to have all of your financial aid ducks in a row, which means you've submitted the FAFSA. Colleges have reviewed what you reported. You verified to make sure it was done correctly, and you were able to give them additional information and negotiate for more money before they give you their final offer. So that goes without saying, right? You want to get the best offer, make colleges give you the best offer. You got to have the FAFSA submitted, because if you don't, the colleges are not going to think, or they're going to think you don't need financial aid. They're not going to give you any money. So submit the FAFSA, submit the FAFSA, submit the FAFSA. Don't be late. Again, 18 million people every single year fill out the FAFSA. You want to be as close to the front of that line as you can, because you want to have the biggest shot of getting everything done correctly, changing any or updating any errors that might have been made, and then getting as much of that free money before it runs out. Loans are unlimited. Free money, grants, scholarships have a limit. Every year, there's only a certain amount set aside for families. Once that pool is gone, it's gone. All right? So don't be late. October 1st, kids' senior year, start filling out the FAFSA as soon as you can at that date. All right. Number 4, biggest mistake, people don't check. They submit the FAFSA, and then they say, done, check, and then they go to the next thing. The next thing usually is waiting for colleges to, give their kids an acceptance. Maybe it's getting their transcripts, or maybe it's just taking a breather because you've just done so much work with your teenager trying to get them to apply on time and do essays, and we all know how much joy that is. But you got to double check. And the reason I put planes in there is the only way I could think of an analogy that airline pilots go through. Like, doesn't matter how many hundreds or thousands of hours they've flown, how much experience they have, and how good they are. Every single time before they take off, they go through a pre-flight checklist. And it's a reason they do that. They don't want to miss any single thing, right? Lives are at stake. All right, so look, no one's going to die if you don't fill out the FAFSA correctly, but you're going to end up not getting the financial aid that you need and that you deserve and that you should have. So if this is important to you, if you want money from the financial aid system and you want the most amount of money, don't make mistakes. Have a checklist, top to bottom. Make sure that the FAFSA, number 1, was processed. Number 2, make sure the FAFSA was processed correctly. And then number 3, make sure that if there is anything else that the FAFSA didn't capture about your family finances, that you reach out to colleges and you start having that conversation. So let's break that down, all right? So number 1, you want to make sure that the FAFSA was processed. I can't tell you how many times this happens. Every year we'll get a call from at least a few families that say, oh my God, we got into the schools, awesome, but holy crap, they didn't give us any money. And we can't pay the full tuition bill. And the first question I ask them is, did you complete the FAFSA? And they say, well, yeah. I said, well, what's your expected family contribution? What's your EFC? And they say, well, I don't know. Every time. Well, so guess what? Here's what happens sometimes. Number 1, they could have made a mistake. Like when they put in the social security number, they mixed up some digits, or their kids mixed up a digit. And if the system can't find your student in the system, or they can't find your tax return in the system, your FAFSA may not get processed. And if it doesn't get processed, that means your EFC doesn't get calculated. And if the EFC doesn't get calculated, colleges don't get a completed FAFSA, which means they're going to think you don't need money. So don't do that, right? So here's what you want to do. Well, actually, back up. The second thing that often happens, if the FAFSA was processed, but it may not have been processed correctly, which means someone might have made an input error. Like when you were putting in the value of your savings, maybe you put an extra digit, maybe you put an extra zero. It happens. Sometimes if there's a blank field, let's say it doesn't apply to you, like, value of some investment. Some families will say, well, that doesn't apply to us. I'll just leave it blank. Don't do that. Because if you leave it blank, the system will miscalculate your EFC. Just put a zero. Well, again, mistakes happen, input errors happen. Maybe the IRS that's supposed to report the income tax return from your to your FAFSA might make a mistake as well. So what happens sometimes is that EFC number is too high. It's overcalculated. And that's the number that colleges get. So either if the FAFSA doesn't get processed, or if it gets processed but not correctly because there's a much, much higher EFC, you're not going to get the money that you actually need and deserve. So you want to always verify. And the way you double check is you log back into the FAFSA 3 or 4 or 5 days after submitting it, download the student aid report, and make sure that it was processed. And you'll know that by looking at the EFC, which is usually in the top rectangle. Make sure that number is reasonable. All right. If it's not, figure out the mistake. Again, if you want to know more, go to FAFSAkit.com. There's a lot more information there. I don't want to bore you to tears. And we just have one more mistake to cover before I got to run to my doctor's appointment. So number 5 is adding color. Again, I don't mean literally adding color to your FAFSA. I do mean adding details. Because even though the FAFSA is long, it's about 100 questions if you have to fill out all of them, it still doesn't capture all of the detail about your family finances. And if you have a special circumstance, like, maybe your income is not what it was 2 years ago, which is the income that the FAFSA looks at, right? So maybe 2 years ago you were doing great, but now because of, especially for so many families, because of the COVID pandemic, maybe you've lost your job, or maybe you've had less income, or maybe your savings have been impacted. Maybe you're taking care of another family member financially. Maybe they're actually living with you. Maybe you had to move and you've got disruptions in your life. Well, the FAFSA doesn't have any place on it where you can put extra information about special circumstances. So what you need to do, if you have a special circumstance that wasn't captured, is you need to reach out to the financial aid office at every one of the colleges and give them that information. So there's usually 3 ways to do that. I've done my best to find a little emoji on the screen here. So number 1, you might need to just send them a letter. Number 2, maybe it's an email. And 3, some form or some colleges actually want you to fill out a special circumstances form that they have on their website. So do your research. Find out how each one of the colleges that your student is applying to wants you to report that extra information. And please do it, and do it early. Engage in conversation with the financial aid office before they've given you the offer. Why? Well, because there are people on the other end of that line, financial aid officers that decide how much financial aid to give you. And the type of financial aid to give you are people. It's not a formula. It's not a robot. There's a human being looking at your form and making a decision. So if you can make a connection with that person, explain to them exactly what you're after and why, chances of you getting more money than someone that doesn't do that is so much higher. So please add the detail if you've got special circumstances. Actually, here it is. This is the link. Go to FAFSAkit.com and download your free ebook. If you've got any questions, you can always leave them in the comments section of this Facebook Live. It's going to stay online I guess, for as long as there's Facebook. So feel free to put in the questions. We'll try to get back to you. If you've got other questions, you can email me, roman@pillar6college.com. If someone's watching this, maybe you can put that into the chat as well. I'd appreciate that. And please remember, the financial aid season opens every single year on October 1st. If you've got a high school freshman, sophomore, or junior, you don't have to actually worry about this deadline. What you have to, what you should worry about is being perfectly prepared, right? And that was the first thing that I mentioned. Know what the FAFSA is going to ask for, how to complete the FAFSA correctly, how to organize your finances so the government doesn't think that you actually have more money than you do, so it doesn't expect you to pay more than you can, right? That's simple. So take your time to learn. However, if you're a parent of a high school senior right now and you're watching this, don't delay, not a single day. Start learning today, because October 1st is a month and 5 days away. And that's perfect amount of time for you to figure out exactly how to complete the FAFSA, how to prepare yourself, how to organize your finances, how to report your finances correctly. So learn all of these steps. You're going to start doing this right away. Remember that financial aid is given out on a first come, first served basis. So you don't want to wait any more than you absolutely have to. Look, I get that we're all busy. You have things that come up unexpectedly. So you might not be able to complete the FAFSA on October 1st when it becomes live, and that's okay. If you can do it in a month, let's say by the end of November, you'll be in great shape. Obviously, sooner is better, but you also don't want to rush it. So please do yourselves a favor, do your kids a favor, because at the end of the day, if you make mistakes on the FAFSA or on the CSS profile, you're not going to get the money that ultimately you could have gotten, which means you're going to have to take that money out of your pocket, or your kids are going to have to borrow, and they're going to have to graduate with student debt. And so why do that to them, right? So good luck to you all. Remember, October 1st is when the financial aid season opens up. Go to FAFSAkit.com if you've got any questions, if you want to learn more. Hit like, share this with people that you think might benefit. I really appreciate you watching this and spending some time with me. Hopefully this was really helpful to you. Next Wednesday is going to be the next Financial Aid Wednesday Live, so make sure to subscribe to our channel, come back, and I'll talk to you soon. Be well, and have a great rest of your day. Take care.